Well, hello everybody once again from Advanced Control University and RTI. I want to welcome you to today's Level 2, the final in the 3 trainings that we've been doing all week. And this today is going to focus on the intermediate level of programming with Integration Designer, and I'm going to cover a number of topics, continuing on from what we started yesterday with our building of a macro or building of a system overall. But we're going to continue with our macro investigation and talk about how to continue the process of building macros a little bit more complex, a little bit more advanced, and then we're going to dive into two-way feedback all along the line. I'll show you some tips and tricks. We'll end the day talking about RTI panel programming and how to get that set up and different ways to incorporate RTI panel into your projects. But really what it boils down to with Integration Designer Level 2 is that a lot of these features that we're going to talk about today just take a little bit of practice and getting used to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you where the tools are for these different things, but more importantly, where to get additional resources so that as you go through and as you're programming with RTI, you have resources, you have areas that you can navigate to and be able to understand, okay, this is exactly what I would need, this is exactly where I can find it, all that kind of fun stuff. So really, I want to make sure that everybody has all the resources at hand. As always, you can send me an email if you have any additional questions after today's training at tylern@rticorp.com. It's at the top of your screen. Or as always, we encourage you to post your questions in the question and answer section of the window to the topics at hand. If it is off topic, I'm not going to answer it right then and there. We will get to it towards the end. So with that, just a couple of quick things that I want to point out with Integration 9.9. The newest update to Integration Designer 9.9 incorporates programming support for the ZW9 expansion device. Now, the cool part about this is that it is just taken off. People are absolutely loving it. And the biggest question on a lot of people's minds is, well, is it going to make my Z-Wave experience any easier, or am I still going to have to go through a major programming and go through the drivers? No, not at all. In fact, it's a testament to how incredible our engineering team is. They've actually built a program within Integration Designer that custom builds a driver for Z-Wave and the ZW9 and the devices you add into it within Integration Designer itself, so that all you really need to do is include the devices, set a couple of the parameters, and it will load into the Integration Designer system, and then you just put the drag and drop commands and feedback options into the proper areas. It couldn't be any easier. We also included video intercom programming support. Now, that does not mean it's available yet. The firmware update there is a firmware update required for the processors and scheduled to be released here in Q1 of 2017, but we wanted to make sure that we had the ID support ready for it so that when we launch the firmware, people can rock and roll with it. Additionally, there are other couple of quick little things, PAL support for the KX10, and just some random bug fixes. So why don't we dive into Integration Designer and continue our process here. So let me open that up real quick. There we are. All right, so allow me a moment here. I'm just going to go ahead and open up our file that we were working with yesterday. There we are. And yesterday we talked a lot about the process of bringing new devices into the fold here. You know, adding the devices in, whether they're through the Add Device window or utilizing import like we did with the Master Bedroom KX7. We talked about building user interface pages like we did here with the page wizard, and having the page wizard available for us to be able to pull up and utilize all the pages that RTI has created as a base template to get started with. We also talked about utilizing merge pages to bring pages in from other devices or other system files altogether, like we did with the security and the security cameras page. We also talked about building our own page like we did with our lighting page and being able to have a lighting page that looks something like this, where we brought the background in from the bitmap library, we placed the devices in, we added in, we copy and pasted the title so that it looks exactly like all of the others. We aligned, we used the alignment tools that are at the top of Integration Designer to build the page. And even more importantly, we talked about how to navigate to different pages by assigning page links through buttons, by right-clicking on a button, assigning the page, and where to place it. So we talked a lot about that stuff yesterday in building the intercom or building the pages, but then we discussed putting commands onto buttons and then building the base level macro. Now from this area, from building a macro like this, and as I mentioned yesterday, even though the macro that we built yesterday was built on the button, it actually lives on the main processor. So what we've essentially done is built a button press macro so that the intelligence still lies on the processor. All that's being issued here is a simple button that says go, or a trigger, if you will. But we need to take this to another level, because building those macros on the individual buttons is great, but what if I need to build a watch TV button and have something like this where I want it to execute in that living room or in that master bedroom for it, in this case the living room, for it to turn on the TV, turn on the DirecTV box, turn on the receiver, or whatever the case may be, go to proper inputs and surround sound modes and all that kind of fun stuff. Well, in a case like this, we need to ask ourselves one question before we start building the macro on this said button. The question we need to ask is there a possibility now or in the future where the client may want to have that same macro accessed by other devices? In other words, could we add a phone into the mix, or a tablet, or an in-wall panel into the living room down the road so that the client can just touch that button and have it turn on the TV or turn off the TV, or whatever the case may be? If the answer is even close to a maybe, then I don't want you to build the macro on the actual device button. Where I would want you to build those types of macros would actually be on the main processor. So if I open up my main processor here, you will see that there is a tab titled System Macros. And on the System Macros tab, you have the opportunity to build macros that are accessible by any device in your project file. For example, we will click on Add System Macro. You see it provides us an ID number of 1. The macro editor button is right here, and then the description. Now you're going to want to give it a meaningful description name. It doesn't help you if you build outside lights 1, outside lights 2, outside lights 3, and then have to go back and remember which bank of lights was in, for the pool, which macro was it built into. So please give it a meaningful name. In this case, I might name this Watch TV Living Room, LVR, and then click on my macro button. Now in this macro editor, you will see that once again the system mode comes up. We see it doesn't say main processor, but we know it's on the main processor because that's where we're building it. And it provides the description title here, Watch TV Living Room. Now nothing has changed from what we did before with the channel macro. All of the same commands are still available for us to be able to utilize. All of the same methodology is there. So really now it's just a matter of identifying and putting in the proper commands for the proper devices. So why don't we start off, and I'm going to keep this fairly simple today, why don't we start off with an RS-232 code. So we'll start off with an RS-232 from our library. We'll hit Select New Device, and just like before, we can use the character-based search to find what we're looking for. So if we're looking for an RX-VX, there we go, 7800 main, a Yamaha receiver. Notice how I would do is do RX-VX. Same basic scenario here. So there's my receiver, and then I choose which port route it's going to go out of. Well, in this case, I'm going to utilize the CM2. You'll notice that it says CM232 and RS232 here. So I have an option to be able to send out that port, that code. In this case, I may want to send it out of the RS232 port labeled audio video receiver. So I select that port. CM232 refers to those multi-purpose ports that can act as IR outputs and RS232 outputs with an adapter cable. Let me pull that cable up here real quick for you so that you can see what I'm referring to. We go to product support, and we'll pull up the accessories. There's my CM232 serial communication module cable, and you'll notice that it plugs directly into an MPIO port. It's actually a 4-section port, and what it will do is convert that signal to RS232. So there's a DB9 serial port connection right there that you just plug into your device. So it's a pretty simple way. The nice thing about it is that in a pinch, you could then send one-way RS232 strings out of that port if these two were already taken up. But seeing as how we've already designated those, we'll go ahead and select the RS-232 port, and we're going to scroll down and find our power on command. So there's our main power on. You can either double click or click and drag it in. Anytime you double click a command in here, it will add it in as the last step in the macro. So if you needed to go to a certain space, you may want to click and drag it. Like I would do, say, for the input DTV CBL, I could place that wherever I wanted and drop it in. So I added main power on, input DTV CBL or DirecTV or digital TV or dish TV or whatever you want to classify that as. And then I'm going to find a decoder mode that I want to use. In this case, maybe we'll just use DTS for the sake of argument. Now, in this scenario, I have 3 commands that are placed here, and they give me quite a bit of information. It tells me that out of serial port 1, which is RS-232, I am sending on a hex string here over the baud rate, the parity, and the stop bit, this command. Problem is, I don't know what this command is anymore because no description followed it. And the reason no description followed it is because you can actually go in and right-click on a step and edit every single aspect of that step. So even though this may be the main power on right now, if I were to change the baud rate to say 600 from 9600, it may no longer reference that command. It may mean blow up refrigerator. No, I'm just kidding, of course. But the whole idea is that you can change these, and then if you did change anything in there, it would then create a problem with the descriptor. So let's make sure, so the reason we don't allow for the descriptor to come along is particularly because of that option. That being said, we still need some sort of description here. So we're going to go over to our command type drop down again, and we're going to select the second from the bottom item titled comment. Now in the comment section, it gives me an opportunity here to list or to put in as little or as many characters as I would like. So in here I could put in a simple comment that says AVR power on, so that I know, or you could even type in further, Yamaha receiver power on. Whatever you want to put in there is fine. Whole point I'm trying to make is that you have the option to put in a descriptor here based on whatever you want. And then we'll drag that little yellow icon at the bottom right underneath that. So now I know, oops, that was terrible. Yamaha is powering on. Well, that doesn't sound right. So I'm going to right click on that, edit the step, and then just change it. Yamaha power on. There we go. So now I have my Yamaha power on command, and I want to add one in for the serial command. So we're going to go ahead and do our Yamaha input DTV, because I know it's going to be my DirecTV input that I want to change it to. And then maybe the same thing for the surround. Surround DTS. So we'll throw that in there. So now I have my 3 descriptions. The important part about this, however, is that even though I have 6 steps in the mix here, only 3 of these commands are truly viable and recognized by the processor. These other 3 comments are just reference points in the programming software for you. The macro doesn't even know they exist. So there's not going to be any further delay in between each one of these commands. You still have your 0.3 second. If we right click and go into that one, you'll see that the delay for 0.3 seconds is still available for us there. And again, you have the option of turning that off if you don't want to use it, but it is available in here for you. So the 0.3 second, then the input, then the surround. But that leads me to another point, is if this is just the standard power on command with a 0.3 second delay after it, before it changes the input, might that be enough time for that to happen? Well, maybe, but probably not. If this goes from a full power off to a full power on, that might not be enough time between those. So I might need to add more time in between these steps for the process to delay, so that the input change is recognized by the device. So in this case, I'm going to add in, under the command type, the option titled time delay. Now you can do as little as 0.1 or 250 seconds, it's up to you, but in this case, why don't we just say it's 3 seconds. And granted, I'm grabbing an arbitrary number. The whole point is that you would need to figure out what that time frame would be. Sometimes calling the manufacturer will help, and they'll be able to answer that question for you. But it might take less time just to take a timer and go 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and pressing the input until it happens. Once you power it on, and then okay, it was 3.5 seconds. Okay, well maybe 3.3 seconds should suffice. So we'll do that. So we drag this icon and place it right above the second step. So now it's going to issue the power on command. Wait a total of 3.3 seconds, because remember, I didn't uncheck mark that 0.3 seconds here. So I've got that 0.3 seconds already taking place, plus an additional 3 seconds, and then the command. 0.3 second delay, and then the surround command. So really we've got a pretty step-by-step process here. Now, what about turning on that TV? Well, let's turn the TV on, and we'll just use a simple IR command in this case. So I'm going to do the IR code from library. I'm going to select my new remote, and in this case, I'm going to use a Samsung LED 55-inch. And I'll just use this 55-inch Series 6000 TV. So I typed in Samsung LED, and I selected the Samsung LED 55-inch Series 6000. Next, we want to go out of the port for the TV, so I select the TV port, and I scroll down, and lucky me, it has discrete code. So I'm going to grab that power on command and place it right at the top, because I know this TV takes a little bit to get going. So now we've got that 0.3 seconds, or we've got that input. 0.3 seconds later, it issues that. So technically, I could actually turn that 0.3 seconds off here if I wanted to save myself a little bit of time. So I uncheckmark that 0.3 seconds, because then it's going to issue that, and the next command is a serial command. It's not going to interfere with that device's command, because we're not sending more than one IR code to the same device in this case. So I just saved myself an additional 0.3 seconds. Actually, I saved my client an additional 0.3 seconds. And the more time we can save them, the faster the process can be, the happier they're going to be. So really what I've done here is given myself an opportunity to save some time. So I've got the TV turning on, the receiver turning on. All right, we need to get our direct TV box turned on. Now, I don't probably need to change the input on the TV. It's probably getting its input through the Yamaha receiver anyway, so I probably already have my TV set to input 2 or 3, but whatever you want. If you wanted to put that in, you could also put that in if so desired. Now I'm going to turn on the DirecTV box. So we're going to clear this out. I'm going to type in HR24, and there's my HR24. I'm going to select my DirecTV port, and I'm going to scroll down, and lucky me, once again, I have a power on command available. So I'm going to grab this power on command and place it into the mix. And once again, I can go into that step and turn off that 0.3 seconds if so desired. So in this macro right now, we've got the TV turning on, the DirecTV box turning on, the receiver turning on, waiting a total of 3.3 seconds, changing the input, changing the surround sound mode. Now, in the scenario like this, we've got it pretty well set up. So I'm going to go ahead and press this OK. We don't need much more than that. We've built our first system macro. Now we need the button on the remote to be able to access that system macro. So what we could do is we could just right-click on that button and create a macro. And then go over to our command type and select System Macro. And there's our system macro, watch TV, living room. We add that in, and there's our trigger for this macro to begin. That would be all we would need to do, essentially, to get that macro rolling if we added any devices down the road, like an iPad or a phone or an in-wall controller or maybe another remote. Everything has access to this system macro. So it's a simple and easy way to do that. Now, we're not done though. We're not done. In a scenario like this, I'm going to go ahead and press OK real quick. We talked about navigation. And one of the things that we need to remember is that if I put on a navigational button on this to go directly, or a page link, to go directly to satellite TV, as I just did, if my client touches this button and it goes right to satellite TV, what are they more likely gonna do? Well, more often than not, they're just going to start button mashing the living heck out of this thing, trying to get the channel to change and speed up the process, right? We don't want them to have that happen because, again, there are macros, there's commands, and they're going to start trying to issue, and all of a sudden the channel is going to be freaking out. So we want to be able to provide them some sense of patience, if you will, or some sense of timing that the process is happening, so that you don't get an angry phone call saying, hold on now a minute, we want to make sure that that the process is happening and it's working. So instead of putting a page link onto the button itself, we're not going to do that at all. We're going to take that off. What we're going to do is we're going to put a page link within the macro we just built on that button. But in fact, we're going to put 2 page links in that macro. The first one is going to be for a please wait page, or a system beginning page, or starting up page, or settle down big guy page. Probably not that last one, but something that gives them a sense of confidence that the system is progressing through, so then they'll start button mashing this thing. So we're going to have it go there first, and then go to the satellite TV once the system has concluded its macro and everything's on and ready to go. So in that macro that we just had open, I'm going to right click on that same button and go to Edit Macro. And in this macro editor, we're going to go and select the command type titled Page Link. And then in this page link, I'm going to make sure the device I'm going to choose is my living room. And I'm going to select the please wait page. But before you ever add in a please wait page, please make sure to uncheck mark the save source page in history box for a please wait page. And the reason for that is that you also have page links titled previous. Well, if you were to create a button, say on the remote, that goes to the previous page, like the client wanted to press the watch TV button and then realize, oh, I just want to go back to, I want to watch a movie. They could press the back button or the previous page button, and it would, in this case, if I had this checkmark box selected, go to the please wait page and they're going to be stuck. So by uncheck marking the save source page in history for please wait, I don't have that problem. So then you can either double click and drag it over, or use the drag the icon into the page, into the macro. So there's our please wait page link. I'm going to recheck mark that box and drag the satellite TV page in there. Now, if I were to say, okay, are we pretty well set here? No, we're not actually. Because what's going to happen is that this is going to trigger, then it's going to go right to please wait, and then right to satellite TV. And we haven't solved our problem at all. The client's still going to button mash, and now they're going to be under the impression the system should be ready to go. So we need to have that please wait page retain on the screen of our T2X, on this T2X, for as long as necessary until we want to grant them access to all the commands and macros for the satellite TV, for that page. So conventional thinking would say, okay, we'll just take that system macro and put it in between here. No, that is incorrect. This is still just a trigger, folks. The macro does not wait for this one to finish prior to moving to the next step. So in a situation like this, you could still place that there. It doesn't really matter. But if you have it first, it's going to trigger and then go right to please wait. So we're going to add in, once again, a time delay. And that time delay is meant to keep the please wait page up on the screen for as long as necessary. Why don't we just say it's a total of 5 seconds that we want it to wait up there. So I'm going to select 5 seconds, drag that little Charger Blue looking clock in there, and now it's going to trigger the system macro. The system's going to begin. It's going to go right to the please wait page, wait the allotted time, and then right to the satellite TV page. So again, you've got to be careful with this 5 seconds. You don't want it to be too long, but you can't have it be too short either. So really time it out for yourself. This additional time does not add any to the system macro time delay that we put in here. This is still triggered and going. This is doing something else completely. So now when I press OK and the client touches this page, they touch this button, it immediately goes to this page, but also has already triggered this macro to begin, so that it turns the TV on, turns the direct TV on, turns on the receiver, waits the allotted 3.3 seconds, changes the input, changes the surround, and once that macro is completed or the 5 seconds is up, it would then go to the satellite TV page. Okay, so again, creating a system macro like this will save you time down the road when you add another device in, like an Apple or a phone or a tablet or an in-wall panel. Now, a question that just popped up, which is a great question, is If you're adding another remote or a panel app in the same room, would you want to build your channel macros on the processor system macro? And you certainly could, but it takes so little time to do that with the channel macro wizard. You can't use the channel macro wizard on the processor. So it takes so little time doing that on the channel macro wizard as it is. You may as well use that, because that takes a heck of a lot less time. Plus then it won't fill in all here, and then you won't have to go here and create the macro to call that, and then create the macro to call that. You're not saving yourself any time at that point. You may as well use the channel macro wizard on each device and build those channel macros there real quick. Okay? Another question that just popped up, and this one always comes up: can you use any sort of GIF animations as images? No, you cannot. There are ways to be able to use some form of animation. You could have it launch another system macro where this page flips, and has the time, spin like the old Windows would used to do. There's ways to do that. There is an animation driver available, but again, that's using a driver and having lots of page links in it and all that kind of fun stuff. So no, you cannot. To answer your question, no, GIF animations are not allowed. It is something we're thinking about, though, and figuring out how to add in. So really with doing something like this, great questions, by the way. Creating a system macro like this would be as easy then as going, okay, right-click, copy, right-click, paste that macro. So now whether they touch this button or this button, it doesn't really matter. Or altogether, we could actually stretch this button all the way across, go into the properties of it, move the image down like that, and then make sure that that is on the top by hitting the bring forward or bring to the front. And now, no matter what, whenever they touch this button, it's gonna trigger. So you have two ways of doing that, and it's up to you on how you want that to look and feel. So building a macro like that, pretty straightforward. Now let's add a few wrinkles in. So we're gonna go ahead pardon me, and why don't we throw in a few wrinkles, like creating one in, say, the master bedroom. So I'm going to go ahead and close our T2X down. Well, you know what? We'll keep the T2X open, actually, and we'll do it on the T2X itself, and we'll throw a few wrinkles in because I know some of you who are following along, we imported this in, and you wouldn't have access to that. So why don't we'll continue using the T2X here, and why don't we build a watch a movie macro. Now in this one we're going to make it a little bit more complicated. So let's start off with adding a system macro, and this is going to be for our watch movie in the living room. Now in this scenario, why don't we make this a little bit more complicated, because we're going to throw a couple of wrinkles into the mix using the same types of devices. So in this case, when we're building this macro up, we could use the same type of scenario here, where we're going to use, say, the RS-232 code from library. We'll add in the different commands and all that kind of fun stuff. So even better, why don't I do this? I'm going to right-click on this button, copy the macro, right-click, paste it on here, so that the commands that we used before are relatively the same. I don't have to retype in a lot of this stuff. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this command. I'm going to delete this command. And we're going to change this one, obviously, to a different command. So I'm going to find my RS-232 command for my input to be Blu-ray HD DVD. Place that in there. Delete the first one. Change the input. Edit that step. Right-click Edit Step and put BD or Blu-ray or BD. And we can keep it at surround sound DTS. So essentially in this, it's a pretty straightforward for the RS-232. But let's go ahead and we're going to complicate things by we're going to use the same TV and we're going to and add that in. But why don't we add in not the we're going to spice this up a little here, folks. We're going to clear this out. I'm going to use the Samsung TV again. And then I'm going to change the input to TV. And I'm going to make this a little bit, you know what, let's add the Blu-ray player first, sorry. Let's go ahead and add a Blu-ray player. So why don't we do a Sony BDP S550. Apologize, folks, I was jumping ahead of myself. So we're going to add in the Sony BDPS550. We're going to change that to the Blu-ray player. And in here, we've got our power on, power off, and all that kind of fun stuff. So why don't we use, just for fun, the power toggle. I know there's power on discrete commands, and there's no reason why we wouldn't use them. But in this case, I want to show you a scenario where if we only had the power toggle command in there, we would have to use it. Well, how would we justify whether or not to use this one? Well, we could use a very cool piece of equipment called a voltage sense, where we could tie in cable connectors to the Blu-ray player somehow. For example, you could lop off a USB cable, plug it into the device, and then if voltage runs to that device, determine whether or not the power toggle command is issued or not. So just doing a voltage power sense might be useful for you. And you've got two ways to be able to do that. If you didn't want to use one of the sensing inputs on the XP6, you could actually utilize a very cool piece of equipment. And that is called, here, one second as I get back to it, the VPS1, the Voltage Power Sense module. Because this Voltage Power Sense module plugs directly into an MPIO port, has the two connecting cables that you can solder together with, say, a USB cable, plus an IR output on it. So we can plug this into the MPIO port, not lose our IR, and be able to do voltage testing with it. So in a scenario like what we're working with, if I was going to plug that into port 2, or port 3, excuse me, using the VPS1, I could then do what is called a status test. And a status test will say, okay, which sensing port do you want to use? Well, you'll notice that I've got my 3 power sensing ports that I could use, but here are my MPIO ports. So I would use my MPIO port for my Blu-ray, and the condition being on or off. Well, it's dependent on you. So if the condition is off, if there's no voltage going, if it detects that there's no voltage, we're going to drag this to the top. If the Blu-ray player is off, if there's no voltage, then what do I want it to do? Then I want it to, and I'm going to left click and hold on the power toggle and drag it above the else statement. So now when this command is issued, or when this macro step is set, it's going to say, okay, port 1, is there any voltage going to that device? No? Then issue the power toggle. If yes or else, then don't do anything. That means the Blu-ray player is on. So it's an easy way to be able to do a test like that. And again, how you connect those leads into a device is up to you. But the easiest way that I've seen is lopping off USB cable and tying them together with that, because when the device is on, typically the USB port's on. When it's off, it's typically off. But again, you'll have to determine what is going to be the best for that. All right. So in a scenario like this, we've got a pretty unique situation here. We've got the BD's power on and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and press OK on this macro. But the interesting part about this situation, and this is where we're going to really try to change things up, is what if I need to have IR be sent directly by the T2X itself to turning on the TV? So my client has this old school Sony Vega TV. Let's just utilize that one. And I need to send an IR code directly from the remote to the device out of its IR emitter while maintaining that RF trigger. Well, as I mentioned before, yesterday, when we first added the T2X, when we added that T2X, it said, what do you want the default output to be? And what I mentioned is that even though we are setting the default output for this device to be two-way with a Zigbee transceiver right now, if I want to change that, I can, and I can do it on a button-by-button basis. Case in point, if I need this button here, when touched, to send IR directly out of it to turn on the TV, I can do that while maintaining the RF frequency with the remote, or with the processor, excuse me. So what I'm going to do is in this button itself, I'm going to right click and go into the properties of it by right clicking Edit Properties. I will then go under the Output tab. And under the Output tab, you'll see that the output mode is currently set up in using the device default, which we set up when we first added the device, as two-way trigger codes. I can then click on Standalone, where the macros will run on the remote and the IR codes are sent directly by the remote. Meaning that any macros that I build on this button will live on that device. Any commands I put on this button will be sent directly by the device via IR. So I press OK. And now when I press right-click, Create Macro, you'll see that the macro editor comes up and it says Standalone Mode. So potentially what I could do is then go into the command type and find my TV. So I'm going to hit select new remote. I'll type in a Sony Vega, and why don't we just do the 55-inch Grand Vega as an example. You'll see that there's no ports available for it because it's going to be sent via IR directly from the IR emitter on the remote. Line of sight, point and shoot, and there's my power command. I add that in, but lo and behold, notice that it is a power toggle. Well, how do I overcome this then? I mean, it's, if this is the situation for this client where they have this one TV where there's a power toggle command that is going to be the main power on and power off for this one TV, how do I overcome it? If the client goes back to the main homepage and says, okay, I'm done watching the movie, I just want to watch TV, and they press the watch TV button, essentially the TV would then turn off. We don't want that to happen. So what we would do instead is we would actually try and find the discrete code. But if we don't have a discrete code, we're kind of out of luck on this one. Because in a standalone mode situation, we don't have any drivers control, we don't have any RS-232, we actually have to use internal logic called flags. Now, flags are a software-based variable, which means that the logic for the flags is done strictly within the programming. There is no physical evidence that is taking place as to whether or not the command should be issued. It's all based on internal logic. That being said, you have to be very careful about how you use flags. The rule for utilizing flags is anytime you use a flag or set a flag, you have to clear that flag out somewhere along the lines. Because if you don't, the system's going to get out of whack comparatively to that of the actual device. So in a situation like this, where I'm going to use internal logic to determine whether or not this power command is issued or not, very similar to what we just did with the voltage sensing, I'm going to, first of all, you have 256 flags to use with every device, plus 256 flags for the processor. So I click on flag 1, I'm going to click on edit flag names, and that flag 1 name is going to be the living room TV power. So I press OK, and now the flag 2 is living room TV power. Now, in a situation like this, I'm going to first test to make sure that this flag has not been used before so that I know whether or not the power command should be issued. So I select my flag operation to test flag. I drag the flag icon into it, and now it says if the flag living room TV power is set, if this flag has been used before, if the TV has been turned on, then I don't want it to do anything. But if it has not, or else, we will drag the power command into the else statement so that the power toggle is only sent if it sees that this flag has not been set before. But anytime we set this power, anytime we are going to turn on the device, we would then need to set the flag. So we'll change the flag operation to set flag and drag that also into the else area so that if the flag has not been set, it turns on the device, sets the flag. So the next time this test happens, it would see that the flag is currently set and thus wouldn't turn off the TV. Now, once again, the rule of the road is that anytime you set a flag, you need to clear that flag out. So we would need to clear this flag somewhere else. We wouldn't want to clear it in the same macro, necessarily. You could, but we wouldn't want to in this situation. We would maybe want to do it in a power off situation. Or if you decide you're done watching TV, a TV power off button. Or something along those lines. But let's finish this macro first before we go creating another one here. So we've got our IR code being sent directly by the remote only if the flag has not been set, so if the logic deems that it should be. We will then change the command to our system macro. And there you will see that there's our watch movie living room that we can add in. So once again, I can send IR and RF triggers on the same button push. Even though this button push is set in standalone mode, I still can send those system macros. And then we go ahead and add in the pages. Now, there are some very unique things about putting a button in standalone mode that you have available to you on devices that you don't have on the processor when a macro is in processor mode. The first thing is that you can do a button test where you can hold down or hit a double click. So I could do all right, if a button is held down for 0.3 seconds, then do this macro or this command. Otherwise, if it's not, do this. For example, in my house, I don't want, we've got a page on our remote that says who's watching, mom and dad or kids. Well, if the kids touch mom and dad's, nothing happens. They need to know that they need to press and hold it for a half a second before it would actually switch to our channels. But if they touch theirs, it goes right to theirs right away. Now, I'm sure my daughter's already figured out how this works, but it gives me an option to be able to kind of keep them out of our, the Spike TVs of the world and the FX and the HBOs and the Showtimes. I don't want them watching those channels. They're pretty young still. So I put in a little parameter in there for that. You also get on your page links that you don't get when page links are put into a processor, the ability to do a page link directly to a frame. So if I had a frame, like if I wanted to go to satellite frame 2, I could do that with a page link for a command, a macro that's created in standalone mode on a device. So in this case, I'm going to do my please wait page. I'm going to uncheck mark the save source page in history just as we did before. I'm then going to recheck mark that box, go to my Blu-ray page, and then put any additional time in, just as we did before for a time delay, that we may need to have that please wait page on. So essentially what we've got going here is when the client touches this button, it is going to immediately do an internal logic check. Has this flag been used before? If not, then issue the power toggle to the device, line of sight IR. Move to the next step, and set the flag. Move to the next step, which is instantaneous, trigger that watch TV, which then turns on the Blu-ray player, turns on, checks the voltage of the device. Is the device on? No, turn on the Blu-ray player. Then it will turn on the receiver, wait the 3.3 seconds, change the input, change the surround sound mode. All the while, it's already flipped to the please wait page, waited the allotted time that it takes to turn everything on, and then changed it to the Blu-ray page. So as I said before, now on this button, I've got IR and RF on a single button push if I want to. Now, if you've got a device like a KX7 that has RS-232 built into it, when you put a button on like that in standalone mode, just as an example here, and create a macro on it, you'll see that you would actually have RS-232 on there because there's an RS-232 port on that device. You can also pin out and go direct IR if you need to. So the different devices will have different options available for you as you go through and create them. Okay? So really when we're building these macros, we've created a couple of different opportunities. Oh, and to clear out flags, same basic scenario. So I could create a power down page like this. And the confirm button, maybe I would need to put that in standalone mode too, because I want to use the flags for the device, not for the processor. So with that button in standalone mode now, when I create the macro, the flags, as you can see, would be available. There's my living room TV power. So then I would have whatever macro trigger it would be to turn everything off. But for the flags that I used in turning off the TV, it would be, once again, the test flag. If the flag is set, then turn off the device. So where's our power command? There it is. We'll drag that and place that in there. So if the flag is set, then turn it off because I want this is the power down sequence. And then the flag I would use would be a clear that flag. And I place that in there. And then, like I said before, you would have maybe a power down macro for everything else in your system. But you can see here how I've now cleared that flag out. So the next time the client goes to their home page and presses watch a movie, it would then set the flag and turn on the device. So anytime you set a flag, you need to clear that flag. Okay. So building these macros, again, ask yourself, is there a chance that other devices may need to have access to them? If so, then build the macro on the processor. Channel macros, I kind of keep those on the individual devices. And the other question that I get quite a bit is, why don't you put page lengths on the system macros? Why do you put them on the device individually? Well, you could put them on the system macros if you wanted, but you have to remember that if you have multiple devices accessing this system macro, those page links are going to happen. So for example, if I grabbed my T2X in my living room and said watch TV, but my wife has the iPad in the patio, and she's setting up her music out there, listening to some music and choosing her station, and all of a sudden it flips to please wait and then to watch TV, well, she's going to be rather upset because then she needs to go back. So it automatically would flip that page for me, and I don't want that to happen. I only want the device that actually issuing the control, the process to happen to actually flip that page. But again, that's up to you. You have the option to do it however you want. I did make an automation event for my house that's called the Happy Birthday automation. When it's my kid's birthday or my wife's birthday, every in-wall panel in the house flips to the Happy Birthday page, and it's just one system macro that I have that has those variety of page links on it that it flips onto the Happy Birthday page and then actually flips between three of them, so it looks like it's flashing different colors. Plus, plays a terrible rendition of Happy Birthday that I have playing all over my distributed audio system. So it's kind of fun to have something like that. So you can do it either way. It's up to you. I just say, my general rule is that if you have the device that's issuing something like this, you leave the page links on the device that you want to actually have flipping pages on. Another question that popped up, why you need to create macro on processor and remote? Well, we just went through the scenarios here. So again, this is macros that are available on the processor that are available to any device. These are going to be the triggers to launch that. And all it is a simple right click, and in that macro, we're going to do a simple a trigger for the system macro to issue it. So we just need something to say go. That's all it is. I'm not creating a full-blown macro. I'm just creating a trigger for it to happen. This one was a little bit different because I needed to send IR directly by the device, so I need to add a couple steps in there, but that was the reason. All right, so when you're building these macros and all that, keep that in mind. Give it a meaningful description and kind of map it out, and the different options you do have. So now we're going to move into drivers. So now in these drivers and two-way feedback, this is a pretty hot button topic with a lot of things. All the drivers you'll need to manually load into your system file under the driver tab for the processor. You can get drivers by going to the dealer site underneath driver store. Now, a couple of quick things for you about this. RTI, all the drivers that we write for you are done free of charge. So you don't ever have to pay for any of the drivers that we provide to you. So all of these drivers are always free. We try to update them regularly with any changes that are made to the actual devices. And we also try to give you as many new ones as we possibly can. So we try to get the latest ones. As an example here, let's do them by release date here real quick. Let's see what the latest one was. So January 23rd. So last week the Denon Hios driver had an update to it. The Wi-Fi, April Air Wi-Fi was January 16th. So we try to release drivers as often as we can, but at the same time we want to make sure that that they work right. So when we write a control driver from RTI, the process is pretty straightforward. It's we establish a relationship with the manufacturer. We get their control protocol called their API, so they need to provide us that, and then we need to get some equipment in-house so that we can make sure that the driver we're writing or the control option that we're writing for it works. So we want to test it so that it works flawlessly for you, so that you're not testing it in the field for us. Okay, so with the drivers that we do write, the opportunity for you is there to utilize them free of charge. Now, we do have quite a few drivers in the mix, and sometimes they're, the way the queue list is set up is based on do we have the equipment in house, do we have a demand for it in the field, and if you have a request for a driver, log into the RTI forum. Let me go back here real quick. Log on to the RTI forum, and underneath driver requests, you post your driver request. So if somebody wants a big ass fan driver, or a Dish Network driver, or Ring video doorbell, all these kind of fun things, I know we're working on a whole bunch of these right now, actually. But if you have a request for a driver, this is the place to put it. Let us know about it, because the more people that get on this and say, yeah, I want that, yes, I want that, yes, I want that, the higher up the queue it goes. But again, it also depends on, is there a control protocol available for it? Do we have the equipment in house? Can we, and we want to get it going as quickly as we can. So we write drivers based on those premises. If for some reason we do not have a driver for you, you certainly have the option to go to the manufacturer and see if they have their own driver. For example, Just Add Power, you can go to their support section and get the drivers that you need for them. So for example, here's the control system drivers for Just Add Power, and you can get those control drivers, the viewed articles, the license keys, the article, the driver, the RTI Luxel driver packages, the Cisco driver package, and you can download these drivers. Now again, these are made by the manufacturer. They are not made by us. So if you do have questions, you need to go to that manufacturer, in this case Just Add Power, to get one, to get support on it. You can't call us because we didn't write it. We don't have the code. We don't know what they did. So you can try the manufacturer and see if they've written their own driver, if we don't have it in our store. Or your third option is to go to the forum and click under the unsupported third-party drivers section. And in the unsupported third-party drivers section is a huge index of drivers that are written by third parties, by developers outside of RTI. Once again, this means that you can't come to RTI for questions on those. You need to go to the person who created the driver to get your questions answered. And they'll post them in here. So for example, if you wanted to use the Amazon Alexa driver, you would have to click on Amazon Alexa, and then this is the person that created the driver. So you would send them a message and say, hey, I'm trying to get this to work. How do I get it to work? So those are, and this driver's been out for a long time. We actually had it before anybody else did. It was the one of the bigger driver releases that nobody knew we had. So we have an Amazon Alexa driver available for you. We just haven't written it yet. It was written by a third-party manufacturer, or a third-party driver writer. The final way that you can get drivers is to apply for the software development kit. So if you have experience writing JavaScript or C++ or something along those lines, you can go to the driver store, go to the driver development program application, and apply for our software development kit. Our software development kit, once you apply for it, it takes a few weeks to verify all the information and credentials, but essentially you can then write your own control drivers to work in RTI. So but we don't give this to everybody. We want to make sure that you know what you're talking about before we just hand it off to you. That's why we make you apply for it. So please make sure to note that you have all those options available for you. Now, when you are ready to download a driver, and I'll download one here real quick. For example, if I wanted, say, the new Denon Hios driver as an example, I could click on this Denon Hios, and it's going to open up a page and tell you all the notes about this driver. And please read those notes to make sure that this is what you need. And then we'll give you all the information. There's even a video on how to use this driver, even though it's a little out of date. We're going to update that here shortly. But the driver info is a requirement. You have to read the driver info. The white papers, read that. There's a whole slew of information about these drivers. You've got to make sure to take the time to read about them. I've got kind of two rules when it comes to utilizing two-way feedback or two-way drivers. The first rule is Don't try to control something you don't already know how to control. In other words, if you've never used a den and HEOS, you've never set one up before, don't try to use our driver to set it up right away, because it's not going to work out well for you. So make sure you have an in-depth knowledge of the device you're trying to control before you actually try to control it. Now, when I click on, say, the driver files, it's going to come up with a zip file. And I can open that file up, show it in a folder, and then I'm going to just go ahead and, like this, and I'm going to extract this. So I'm going to extract this file, extract them all, and I'm just going to put them real quick onto into the download section. So they're into the download section. So there's my section in here, my download section. There's the info that you'll want to read, the white paper, and then the actual the sample file for this device, and the actual .rti driver file. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go into your documents, and under Integration Designer, find your control drivers folder. And in here, you can then just drag and drop that file into here. So drop that into the control drivers, and yes, I want to replace it because this is brand new. So there's the brand new HEOS driver. It's the update. And then you'll want to take a look at the sample file as well. So I'm going to go back, and I'm actually going to pull up my sample file folder that I keep under Client Files. All the way down at the bottom, there's my driver sample files. And I'm going to grab this den and HEOS file, move it in there. It's going to ask me to replace it. Yes, absolutely. And then I'd be able to see the sample file. Now, the sample file is for you to use. You're more than welcome to use it however you want. So I'm going to go ahead and close this real quick, close this one. And now I've got those devices in the file, or those files within the folders where I can access them. So I can go into Integration Designer. I could click Add and find my control drivers for the den and HEOS. Looks like that one's old, so we could I can find my other control drivers here. Let's go to that real quick. Documents, Integration Designer, just like you would do, your control drivers, and there's my den and HEOS driver. So then I could add that in, and it's added in. So let's go. We're going to go ahead and add in a couple of drivers here. The first one is I'm going to add in, say, the weather driver. I'm going to add in, why don't we do the XP, or the where's my driver? The clock driver is a very important driver to always have in there. So you've got your weather, your clock. I'm going to go ahead and add in the Nuvo. We've got the den and HEOS. That's fine. We can use that. Or, you know what, even better, why don't we use the Nuvo as well? Then I could show you a couple of features about that. And we'll go ahead and add in a Lutron driver. So these are all drivers that I've downloaded. Where's my Lutron driver? It's probably in my other folder. So my Lutron RA2. So just as examples here, you can see that as I've added these drivers in, they've filled in the loaded drivers section. And when you start to use these drivers, or when you've decided you're going to start using these drivers, the first thing you should always do with any driver is always read the get info. You'll want to read this get info because this is information all about how to properly set up, configure, and use the driver, the commands, the feedback options for it. It gives you all the vital information so that it works. Because again, these devices can be controlled via IP, RS-232. You want to get feedback on them. You want to have automation working with them. You've got to know how this driver fully works. We try to make it as simple and straightforward as possible, but some of the devices are a little bit more involved. So, for example, on the den and HEOS, this driver controls up to 16 den and HEOS audio players speakers via the network. Pretty straightforward on there. But then there's a whole bunch of special notes. Now, some of these get infos are quite long, but it's worth the read. Trust me. If you call in tech support and have a question on a driver, and I can almost guarantee you the questions are going to be answered in the get info. They'll help you, but they're also going to say, well, you know, in the get info, there's a whole slew of information about this. So you may want to read the get info first just to make sure that you're familiar with the driver as a whole before you start using it. Some of it is a lot of information. Some of it's fairly straightforward, like location setup, how to set it up for like a city and country or a city and state, or location, latitude, longitude, all that kind of fun stuff to make sure that you're getting the proper information set up onto the system itself. The clock driver will have next to nothing in it. System variables, clocks, all that kind of fun stuff. The Nouveau wireless driver has fillable information. Now, the unique thing about our drivers is that these drivers have a need fill area, which means that if I start to utilize them and I want to put things onto the driver settings and configurations, it's going to automatically populate into the driver section of the library browser. So if you go to the library browser and click on drivers, you will see that it is now populated with the drop down with all the drivers we've put into it. The clock, the HEOS, the weather, Nouveau wireless, all that kind of fun stuff. Okay? As you configure the driver, the information here will populate over here. So you'll get all the commands available for it, you'll get all the variables available for it, and it goes through the population as you set the configuration up. So in this situation like this, for example, weather, you'll want to take your time setting this up. So in my case, 55379 is the zip code down here in Shakopee, but if I was in, say, Minneapolis or my house, it would be 55410. Or I could do Edina, Minnesota. So it's up to you on how you want to do that. As these drivers are getting set up, you will see this box down below that will populate as you highlight these things as to what information is needed. Again, some things don't need a lot, some things need sometimes there's next to no information that needs to be set up, sometimes there's a lot. So just kind of take your time through this. Don't rush through this process, especially when you start using things that are controlled over the network, because the last thing you want to do is put in the incorrect IP address, assign all the commands, and have nothing work. It's the most frustrating thing you can do. So go through and take your time with all of these and make sure. But what you'll notice here is that we also provide need fill information. So for example, the Lutron RA2 homework QS, we've got 100 device IDs used. You can use up to 400, but I don't need 400. I need maybe 5. Let's just put 5 as an example. So I hit 5, and now you'll see the device ID names have gone away. So now I can take the ID name 1 and name it for wherever I need to go. So maybe this is my living room. And why don't we'll go to our living room, and we've got our track and accent. So I'm going to name this first one track. And again, it's whatever it's going to be in the system settings when you're setting up the Lutron system. Basically what we're doing is we're taking we've set up the device already, like the Lutron system or the HEOS or the Nouveau. We've already set it up. Now we're going to take the setup information from there and populate it into the setup information of the driver so that it makes sense as we're going through. So LVR ceiling, LVR cabinet, and maybe this is the, I don't know, kitchen. So really what I've done here is I named this, but what you'll notice here is that as I've named these, if I go over to the library browser on the right hand side and select the Lutron RA2, you'll see that they've now been named. So LVR track 1, or track is ID 1, accent is 2, 3, 4, and those names are going to show up here. So if I wanted to put the name in here instead of typing it, I could put in the text and put in a variable there for it to populate on that name. And we'll show you how to do that all here in a second. But first things first, you want to make sure you go through this process very slowly to name the different ones. Nouveau, another perfect example. Maybe this is for the master bedroom, and maybe this is for the living room. Maybe I have some direct Pandora stations that I want to use. You know, it's up to you on how, if you want to populate those in or tune in preset directs. You know, the Den and Hios, same basic thing. The username for the Hios account, the password, and then the friendly name. The control port, using as a control port or not. You know, player 2 friendly name. So what do you want to name these devices? So again, we try to make it as simple and straightforward as possible, but you are going to have to take your time with this part. Once you've got the devices set up in your system, then you can go ahead and start populating the commands onto the buttons themselves. So as an example here, if I've got my lighting and I've got my Lutron Rod 2 Homeworks QS, in this section I've got 3 main areas. Your driver selection from the drop-down, your variables, which are going to be the 9 different types of feedback options that could be available for that driver, and then the driver commands, which are going to be what you want that device to do. Upon selection of one of the commands, you may have one of the 4 parameter sections below it populate with options so that you can be much more specific. That's the nice thing about drivers, that you can get very specific about exactly what you want the device to do. So for example, if we're in our lighting page here, and I've got my Lutron and I want this to turn on and off, I need to find the switch controls for the track lighting. So I look through the driver. Well, here are my dimmers. Okay, I'll scroll down a little bit and I'm going to find my switch commands. There we go. So switch commands. And now we can select the first one. So living room accent, or excuse me, living room track lighting. And I want the switch to be a toggle so that this switches on and off. So I drag the switch command to that button. I can do the same and then just change the ID to ID2 or living room accent and drag that to that button. For frame 2, the ceiling, all right, ceiling lights, drag and drop that on. The cabinet lights, same thing. Drag and drop those commands on so that it would essentially toggle it on, toggle it off. It's just a toggle switch command, which is great. And of course, you can have your on commands, your off commands. If you've set up scenes or keypads or whatever, you have all those options in here. All right, so now we've got our switch commands. We want our dimmers to issue the level. So in this case, I'm going to set my dimmer level. So I want the slider to set the dimmer level for the track lights. So I'm going to choose set dimmer level. I'm going to choose it as my track ID and I'm going to drag it to the slider. Notice the letter C appears, meaning that there's now a driver command. Same thing for my accent lights. Drag that to that button. Change the ID to ceiling lights and of course to the cabinet lights. Drag and drop those on to be able to see. So now I've got these functions here that, or excuse me, the commands placed on there. No problem with that. All right. So what else could I have happen here? Well, I could have, I could go to say the weather page and look to see if there's any sort of commands that I want to put on there. Or if I have, you know, another set of commands. But the commands are just the commands. They're just like IR commands, like RS-232 that we dragged and dropped onto buttons. The same basic philosophy takes place. Now the feedback, that's a whole different story because you've got 9 different types of feedback available, 9 different types of feedback available for the driver, for the device. Now not all 9 may be available for an individual device. You may have some that have 5. You may have some that have 2. You may have some that have all 9. It depends on what we were able to get from that device. Now we'll go through all 9 of these here, but before I do so, I don't want you to think that we're going to just go through them and leave you hanging. So in the on the dealer site, underneath resources, technical documents, and technical bulletins, there is an option for you to download what is called the two-way feedback variable definitions. This two-way feedback variable definitions is a technical bulletin that goes through each one of the variable definitions for a driver that's available and gives you examples of how they can be used. So really what it boils down to is that if you download that bulletin and you're working with it as you're working through the drivers and trying to understand them and see how they work, then it'll make a lot more sense for you. So please take advantage of that. Download that two-way system. Again, it's called Two-Way Feedback Variable Definitions, and it's under the Resources section, Technical Documents, and Technical Bulletins. Now back to our driver. I want to be able to have this. So let's go through these. So button text. Button text refers to text of a button. So if you wanted to have a button tell you something like the shade, the dimmer or shade level, you could have that populate for text like that, where it says 50 right now. It would tell me that it's 50 or 40 or 30 or 20 or 60 or 80, what the dimmer or shade level is right there. In another scenario, if I open up my master bedroom as an example and go to the Nouveau Simple, if I want the artist name, that would be a great example of button text. So if I were to select, say, the Nouveau wireless piece and say, okay, I want the artist name, I'm going to find the button text that has that. And in the case here, that would be my player, where are we here? Master bedroom. So we have our master bedroom now playing info, which would be title. Place that in there, and there's Tim Mahoney. Or if I wanted the song title, it would be subtitle. Or if I wanted description, that would be the album name. So basically, letters and numbers consist of button text variables. Okay, if you want to see letters and numbers, it's button text. So time, dates, temperature, all that kind of fun stuff. I went to the weather page here and I said, okay, I want this to give me the temp. I could go to the weather and say, give me the current condition temperature, place it on that button, and it says 68. Now, when you right-click on one of these buttons that has a variable on it, and you go to edit text, it'll come up as VAR. And then of course, the degree symbol is a typed symbol, but the VAR indicates that there's a variable. And if you left-click on that variable, you will see that it has the temperature with the driver variable that's been placed on there. Well, what if I needed more than one variable on there? Like I want the wind variable at 10 miles per hour. Well, what I can do is I look at this, I right click and go to edit text, and you can see that there's 3 variables in there. If you want to add another variable into this button text line, you can't drag and drop it on, it'll just override it. So in the case like this, I'm going to go to here where it says insert control variable, click on that, select the driver, in this case the weather driver, and then what I want to populate it with, humidity. I'm just grabbing one here, and now you'll see it says VAR. So if I press OK and drag this button out so you can see the whole thing, it now says 60, which would be the 60% humidity there. So you have a way to add more than one button text variable to a button if so desired. Reverse state will give your button a reversed look to it. For example, if we had a button like, let's go back to our Nouveau Simple page, like this, where I have a toggle command for my shuffle button. So you can see that the driver command there is for the Nouveau Wireless Play mode to go into shuffle and to toggle. So every time I press that, it toggles on and toggles off. But how do I know this button has been pressed, or if the shuffle is currently on? Well, this button actually, if I go into the properties of it, has 2 separate images. It has a lighter shade. So I could have it remain in this lighter shade by having a reverse state variable for the Nouveau driver, in this case, be for the selected player shuffle option. So if the selected player shuffle is on, the reverse state will come up. So it would look something like this. They touch this button and it would go to its reverse state and look like that. They touch it again and it turns off the shuffle. Inactive state, you won't use a heck of a lot, because what inactive state does is render a button completely inactive, non-responsive, until a condition is met. So a good example would be, say, on a screen like this where we have volume up and volume down. Well, if I had the volume up and volume down commands onto this, so if I went volume up command onto here, drag that on, and volume down command onto here, and then the mute command on, well, if I wanted to, as it stands right now, if I mute my system, my client could come up and press volume up or volume down, and it would unmute the system and then ramp it up or ramp it down. But in talking with them, they said, no, we don't want that. We want to manually unmute the system first and then ramp it up or ramp it down. Okay, well, what we can do is we can render these two buttons inactive when mute is enacted. So I would find the selected player mute option in this case under the inactive state and drag that to the volume down and volume up buttons, so that when mute is enacted, these two don't work. Only when mute is deactivated will it work. You won't use inactive state a heck of a lot. Okay. All right, visible state. Where could visible state come up? Well, visible state is very useful if you want to be able to have buttons that will appear and disappear. So as another good example here, let's go back to our Master Bedroom Nouveau page. I've got 4 buttons right here, thumbs up and thumbs down. Well, Nouveau has a variety of streaming sources available for it. It's got Pandora, TuneIn, SiriusXM, Spotify, I believe now, Line In, Bluetooth, library. I mean, there's just a whole slew of them in there. But the only source that utilizes thumbs up and thumbs down is Pandora. So what I could do is say when Pandora is the active source, these 4 buttons appear. And when it's not the active source, they disappear. So what I'm going to do is I selected all 4 of these buttons, right click on them and go into the properties of them. And in the properties, I can also, under the variables tab, see what variables have been activated. In this case, I want to do a visible state, so that I have all 4 of these buttons only appearing when the Nouveau wireless player's selected player has a source of Pandora. So when Pandora is the active source, these appear. When it's not, they disappear. And you can see which buttons have visible state variables to them by pressing this button at the top, Show Buttons with Visibility Variable. You click on that, they disappear. In fact, you can even filter it. So if you have a multitude of buttons that have visibility states and they're stacked on top of each other, like the stop, pause, and play buttons I have here, what I could do is use this arrow, this down arrow next to the visibility variable button, and say, okay, show me the play button. Show me the button that has the source Pandora on it, so that I can see which buttons have the visibility variables attached to it. Okay. And that can be, and it doesn't, a driver isn't the only thing that can use these variables. You can use flags to trigger them. You have a whole slew of options available for you. All right. Now, what about this next one called a graph data source? Well, a graph data source is useful when you're using gauges or sliders. So if we go back to our lighting page and I want to see this slider move, as it stands right now, if my client touches it, nothing's really going to happen. But if I want to be able to move this slider up and down, I need to assign a graph data source so it can be moved. So I'm going to choose my Lutron driver, and the graph data source being living room track ID1 dimmer shade level. So I want to see the dimmer and shade level. I drag that to this button, and now as my client moves their finger up and down with the slider, the dimmer level is going to change. Same thing for this one. So I drag and drop onto that, frame 2, the ceiling, and then the cabinet. Perfect. All right, what about the next one? What about the toggle button data source? Well, if I want to see these toggle switches move from on to off and off to on to be representative of the light, I need to use the, in this case, dimmer, scene off, shade, and switch status. Well, these are switches, and we're using the switch commands on there. So I'm going to use ID1 for the toggle button and drag and drop it onto that. Same thing for 2. Same thing for 3. And same thing for 4. Be able to place them on. So now as my client touches that button, the toggle switch switches on and switches off. So they're able to see those things happening. The next item is called an image list data source. An image list data source is most widely recognized for the weather page, because on this page you see we have a button, and this bitmap image actually came from the bitmap library. And if we type in the word weather and do a quick skim down search, you'll see that there is a button, a variety of buttons that look the exact same. Well, these are weather conditions. These are buttons that are made to have stacked images behind them so that they can be represented by a driver and brought to the front. So for example, this, if it's raining out, this would have changed to a cloud with raindrops. If it's snowing, it changes to snowflakes. If it's sunny, it's just a big yellow sun. But how do I get that image to come to the forefront? Well, we do it through a driver. So under the image list data source, we would change it to our weather driver as an example here. And I want the current condition graphic. So I'm going to drag the condition graphic here so that the current conditions are going to be displayed in an icon format, or an image format, excuse me. And we could do the same thing for the forecast data. So day 1, condition graphic. Go down to day 2, find the condition graphic. Day 3, condition graphic. Day 4, condition graphic. So now these are all going to be shown and represented by the information that we're going to get from the driver through Weather Underground is where it comes from. As you can see, this driver provides weather data provided by Weather Underground using an internet connection. So the processor has to be connected to the internet for this to pull. But that's what an image list data source does. An item list data source is going to be a two-way scrolling list, and it's best seen through using a browsing list like this. So if I have a browsing list for, say, my Nuvo, and I want to get all the artists, and then when I select an artist, having all the albums, and then I select the album, then the songs, I can use the item list data source to do so. And that would just be as simple as the browsing list in this case. So I drag and drop that item list data source onto this image. Again, this bitmap image is just titled a two-way item list, so that you could drag and drop that onto an area and then stretch it out to meet your list sizing needs. This is just the background that was placed on here. So if we wanted to change that out, you certainly could, but you get the idea. Okay? So an item list data source would be brought onto there. And then the final one is called a dynamic image. A dynamic image is easily represented, and we'll use the weather page again, where if I wanted to have, say, a satellite image, or an image of, the satellite. So in this case, I would just draw a big button. So we'll just draw a big button here. And I'm going to go to my dynamic image for my weather and find my satellite mode dependent and drop it on. So now it's going to show me a satellite image dependent on which mode I set it in, visible or infrared. This also works for, say, if you wanted to have cover art. So if I wanted to have cover art, I could go to my Nuvo Wireless. I've drawn a button on there. I go to my Nuvo Wireless and find the selected player now playing icon. And boom, now I would have the icon fit, or excuse me, the image posted on there. And you'll probably want to go into the properties of this and make sure that under the variables, it does stretch, because you want the image to stretch down to fit when it comes to cover art. Sometimes radar images don't look all that good when you stretch them out, but you do have the option, of course. Now there is one final type of variable that I want to mention here real quick, and that has to do with the frames. So you can see on the framing here we have 6 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I need to have something represented on the page itself. And why don't we, oops. That gives me some sort of indicator that tells me what frame I'm currently on. So as my client's swiping from right to left and left to right, I can see which frame they're currently on. So the bitmap image that I'm going to get, I'm just going to title it frame. And there I've got frame indicators. And they're based on, because you can only have 10 frames, 1 through 10. So in this case I have 6, so I'm going to find the 6 frame indicator. There it is, frame indicator 6. Drag that onto my page. Center it up. Maybe bring it down a little bit. But then I'm also going to right click on this and make sure it shows up on all frames. So every frame is going to have that. But now I need to populate it with feedback so that this image essentially is going to move dot to dot to dot as I go from frame to frame to frame. That is done not through a driver-based variable, but through an internal variable. So there's truly 10 different types of variables for you. There's internal variables and then the 9 for the drivers. The internal variables are accessed by going into the properties of the button, selecting variables, and then choosing from it. So in this case, I have an image list object. I want that image to change based on the frame I go to. So I'm going to select the arrow key, choose my internal variable, and find my frame. And I want it to display the current frame of the frame I'm on. So I select current frame. Other feedback internal variables are going to be located in here for your intercom, for your remote finder, for your volume, for your CX7 only, and the RTI panel connection if it's connected or not. So I'm going to go ahead and select current frame, press OK, and now as the client swipes from right to left and left to right, that little dot's going to move dot to dot to dot to show me which frame they're currently on. So really with all these different types of variables, again, I encourage you to go to the dealer site, download that two-way variable definition sheet, and work alongside that as you work with some of these drivers. Again, just to reiterate my point, you want to make sure that you go through this very slowly, and then you always read the get info. Please read the get info. It will give you answers to the driver questions that you have. If you have questions over and above what the get info provides and you're not sure about it, please make sure to call tech support. We're here to help, or contact whomever wrote the driver. We want you to help. We want you to be successful with it. All right. I know a couple of questions have come up. Flag set states for if variables. Frank, why don't we have to backtrack quite a bit, so why don't we'll visit that. You shoot me an email on that and we can talk a little bit more about that. Can I trigger the happy birthday macro by date? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the automation event can use time-based events to be able to do that. So yeah, that's exactly how I do it. So I think it's every day at 5 a.m. I have a macro trigger that tests the date. And that date basically is it August? Is it the 27th of August? And if so, then do this. But and I'm using variable test logic for drivers to determine that, and essentially what will happen is that if it's not August, it's done with the macro. If it's August but it's not the 27th, it's done with that macro. So, but what that macro does is, like I said, turn on all the different, change all the panels, put on a terrible rendition of Happy Birthday, all that kind of fun stuff. So yeah, you can absolutely do something like that. How can I link the button Play Movie to control the room like KNX system? Well, KNX, I believe, has a driver. You would just put the driver command into that macro that you create. So and again, I don't have the KNX driver with me or loaded in, but what we could potentially do is on a macro like this, I could say, all right, living room, we're going to go back into the macro. There's a system macro for it, that's right. So let me go back to the system macro and then watch TV in the living room. That macro is going to also consist of a driver command that goes from the Lutron, and we're going to have the switch, or maybe we'll just have the dimmers. We'll set the dimmer level to, why don't we do 30% for the living room accent lights, and we can throw that in. as an example. So you could throw that command into there if you wanted to. If you have scenes set up with the Lutron system, you could access the scenes through a keypad or a phantom keypad or whatever the case may be. But you have the option to add those in. It just depends on the driver and where it's going to be located. How do you review variables have been assigned to buttons? You just right-click on the button itself. You right-click on the button, go to the weather page here, right-click on the button, go to Edit Properties, and you'll see the variables options there. If it's a button text, once again, you right-click, go to Edit Text, and then you'll see VAR, and you can click on that and see what it is. Yes, once again, we will be posting these videos. It will be posted by tomorrow on a link via the training calendar. Can you show us how to get a picture-in-picture to demo a channel before sending command? No, not today. We can't. That goes into pulling up objects and using objects, and it depends on the device and what type of camera and all that kind of fun stuff. So no, today is not a good day to do that. It just dives into a whole slew of other things, and we still have to get into RTI panels. So, but you can visit the KX10 video that does show how to access that if you are interested. So let's get into the RTI panel here real quick, and we have limited time. But again, there's not much different between the RTI panel devices than there is with, say, the with any other RTI device, any other RTI branded device. So Android and iOS devices are pretty well straightforward. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just minimize these real quick. And if we're going to add an iOS or an Android device, we're going to go up to the Add Device window, and I'm going to pull down here the option for iOS. Now, again, don't be alarmed if you don't see like iPhone 6 or 6S or 7. We will automatically upscale it for you to meet your needs. The only one that we do not have on there are a variety of Android size panels, because those are resizable, because there's so many different RTI panel devices out there, or Android devices out there, excuse me, that for us to have those would just create a huge list. So we give you the option to put in the sizing, and I'll explain how that's done in a minute. So, but really, when you're going to add in a device, like an iPhone or something along those lines, and I'm just going to add in a 4 for the sake of size. Maybe this is Dad's or Bill's iPhone as an example. You'll see that it'll come up. There's an iPhone. And then we do have some available Page Wizard templates available for, we have available Page Wizard templates for all of the iOS devices. We have them for select Android devices. You'll have to go onto the forum to see which ones of those are. I don't know them all off the top of my head because of the different sizings and DPIs and all that kind of fun stuff. But you can go onto the forum and find those. Just do a search for Android Page Wizard or something along those lines. So you can select the pages just as we did before. So we can add in, say, a home page and source menu. You can add a weather page in, a DVD, Blu-ray, all that kind of fun stuff. We could add in cover art and all that kind of fun stuff, security camera. I mean, you can add in everything that you want. And it's, like I said before, assigning commands and macros and all that kind of fun stuff is no different from the way it was before, in all honesty. Bring this down a little bit. There we go. So I could drag commands over. I could put macros on the button, create a macro, do the same basic thing of what we did before. There's our system macro to watch TV in the living room. Boom, it's on there, ready to go with it. The difference between RTI panel devices and RTI devices is that you do have the option in the driver, in the properties of the device, to support an orientation of auto rotation, portrait only, or landscape only. So assigning commands and building feedback and all that kind of stuff, for the most part, is exactly the same, but the orientation is a big thing that a lot of people don't realize is available to them. And you can lock your client into a portrait only or landscape only. But if you decide to do auto rotation, okay, you will need to get in the habit of going to your device and view as landscape, or just get in the habit of using Control Q to show it in both landscape and portrait mode. And you can see how I'm doing that using just Control Q. The reason this is important is because you can see the location for these is different. So is the background, so is the shading, images, and all that kind of fun stuff. But even the actual images themselves are bigger and smaller. Good example for this, if I go to weather, for the most part those are pretty well the same. There is quite a bit of difference between those. So like location of the word volume and all of that stuff. If you happen to make a change to this, for example, if I were to take this and move it over here, you'll notice that it didn't change over here. And the reason for that is because we don't make any assumptions in Integration Designer. We don't assume that just because you want it in one place in one orientation, you want it in another. So that being said, if you are going to design a page from scratch, if I go to new page, and this is going to be our, once again, our lighting page as just an example, and I decide, okay, I want, an image in one place. Let me grab just image like this, and I'm going to put it right at the top center here, and I hit Control Q. Notice how it's not in the top center anymore. It's still in that basic location that it was before. Again, you would need to make that decision if you wanted to. So then I would have to move it in the center there, and then move it in the center there. So you need to make the decision on how you want to do that. Now, the added bonus for you is this, is that you have actually the ability to make two separate pages based on orientation as well. So I could say, okay, for the background color for this one, or for an image, I want it to be this. So I could say, okay, I want an image, and I'm just going to throw a image on here real quick. Maybe it's that's not good. Let's see if I can find something real quick here. Oh, these are all family. Sorry about that. Just trying to find a quick image here of something. Spider-Man. All right. So I'm going to stretch this out and make that as my background, okay? But if I hit Control Q, notice how it didn't come along with it. So I could potentially say, okay, well, I want this page in the landscape to have this. Oh, sorry about that. I want this to have this one, or like this. So now on this page, I have two completely separate pages that look different, just on background itself. I can also decide which pages or which orientations have which buttons appear. So you can assign visibility variables to these by right-clicking and going into the properties of it, and underneath the General tab, I can say, I want this button to only show in landscape view, not portrait view. Press OK, and it's no longer there. So essentially, I could have one button appear here and not here. This is very advantageous for you if I delete this all together and put on, say, something like a larger satellite TV image, or an image like this on this orientation, but then go into here and maybe I would need this to be bigger. So I could essentially say, okay, I want this to show up only in landscape mode, not portrait. So it's not there. Find a bigger image of it, let's go to the extreme, like this one, and have that show up only in portrait view. So you can see the size difference here between the two of these images. So you can have that option, which is very advantageous to you, because if you create something like a let me add a satellite DVR page in here just for the sake of argument here, satellite cable DVR, you could potentially have your favorite keys like this show up only in your portrait mode, and then have your cursor be in your landscape mode as an example. So you could have an option like that. Again, I'm just speculating on different options that you could do. Additionally, when you are designing pages from scratch, When you go to draw your own buttons, you can only draw them in 90-degree corners. With RTI devices, we could draw them and have them shaped in circles and rounded corners and 3D look. I don't have that option with iOS or Android devices because of the restrictions of iOS and Android. Additionally, and I'm going to just get rid of those here real quick, if I want sliders, I have to use the iOS or Android-based sliders for vertical and horizontal. Toggle switches, you can use the RTI ones, but these blend a little bit better with the iOS-based version. And then gauges, you can use the iOS or Android-based gauges as well. So unlike RTI, where we've got these types of gauges, you have to use these, and you draw them on. They're not going to be listed in the bitmap tab. Okay. The other difference here is that a two-way scrolling list, as it was found here with our two-way, these lists here will not work on here. You need to draw it using the number 2. There's your list item. So you draw the number 2 on, you select number 2 and draw your list item. And again, you still have all the functionality. You can make it transparent, yellow if you want, or black, or whatever the case may be. You can go into the properties of it and put lines in between them if you want. So you have the options to still put lists on and populate them with feedback. It's just that you have to draw the list on rather than place and space the list on. The number 1 is a one-way scrolling list. A one-way scrolling list is a list that is populated by you. So if I go to edit scrolling list here, it's a list that's populated by you. You can put in all the list items in here and have macros that associate with them. And you can do it with, you can have different labels, so they can be labeled different. They can have images. They can even have feedback on them. In fact, let me give you an idea of what this whole thing looks like. If I go to my RTI panel here, when we first download it from the App Store, iOS and Android, you do a search for the RTI panel as shown. And you select it and install it. The app is, of course, free. Now, after the installation, the RTI panel icon is going to appear on the iOS and Android device, like so. It'll be purple with that white house. Upon the initial launch, when you launch that app for the first time, it'll come up with a welcome screen with 2 options for iOS and 3 for Android. Now, the third one for the Android looks like this. This is where you get your Android information, the sizing information that you need in order to properly configure it, okay? You will need to get, and it'll look something like this. You will need to get that device info to add an Android RTI panel device into the Integration Designer program correctly. Okay, and I'll show you that here in just a second. If you decide to hit the demo mode, it will launch an emulation of a control system without a processor, and it's a very straightforward type of demo. There's not a lot to it. When you one-way, as we were programming, we were talking about the one-way scrolling list. A one-way scrolling list with just the labels in it would look something like that. So if I were to label it kitchen, master, bathroom, like this, kitchen, master, bathroom, etc., etc., it's going to come up and look like this. Kitchen, master bedroom, master bathroom, master bedroom, bar, pool, all that kind of fun stuff. But I also mentioned that we could put icons in there. So if I wanted to, I could put little scrolling list graphic or bitmaps into there as well. So again, if we were to go back to Integration Designer and I were to find something like 32 sized images, and I scroll down and find one that I like, or maybe even smaller. Let me find the source icons. Where are my source and zone? There we are. And find the ones I'm looking for. I can place the icons in if I so desire. So I could take an icon like this and place it in here if I wanted to. Now the thing you'll have to do is go into the properties to make sure that it goes to the auto height. So you can see it went to 76 right away because that's the size of this image. So 72 by 72, it would now say 76. So it's going to auto size these based on the largest sized image. So now you would get little images next to the name of the specific label that you put. You can also do little graphics and variables. So we can have on and off switches. So you could have this being all the zones of lighting with the on and off switch on it and being variable on there. Now the toggle button variable is currently the only one that allows for that. But we can do, say, go to drivers, go to our Lutron system as an example, and say, okay, I want my toggle button data source for the living room track ID, and I'm just going to grab one here and throw it onto here, and you'll see that there's a little variable piece. Thus, it would populate with a little variable. So you're not actually touching that. What you're touching is when you touch that list item, you're actually issuing the macro command. So the macro command you might have in here would be just that command that we talked about earlier. It would be that driver command for the Lutron switch command to toggle in that situation. So now with that macro, when you touch that list item, it would actually show that, and then the variable itself would show it in an on or an off state. A two-way scrolling list would look something like this, where you would have the two-way list item that's populated by the driver feedback. So that was that item list data source that we talked about before with the when we were talking about variable feedback. So this item list data source, that would be where we would use the number 2 list, bring that in, and then post the browsing list and place that in there, and it would show up with the artist name or the song titles or whatever the case may be in that situation. Okay, so it's important to note that there are design differences between these two, between RTI panel devices and iOS. Just to reiterate my point on the Android, if I go back in and try to add an Android device, you'll see it comes up. Here's what I need. I need the portrait width and height, the landscape width and height, the resolution, and we can go from there. But again, you get that information from the app on the device itself. Okay. Now the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that as we start to develop these things and as we start to program them and get them all set up for the different options, you need to figure out kind of what's going to work best for your clients and what's going to look good and what the buttons are, and that's completely up to you. You get to play with that. You get to have the options of doing that. We provide you the base templates to get started with, but you certainly have the opportunity to customize it and make it look and feel your own. So once we're all set, and we mentioned this yesterday and we're ready to go, we always want to make sure we have the latest firmware on all of our devices, and when we're ready to send the device, we hit send to device. Now when you send this to the device, you'll see that everything's going to come up except for the actual iPhone. And the reason for that is because all the programming for that iPhone, for that iOS or Android device, actually lives on the processor. So all you need to do is load in the processor, the programming files, and it will house all of that. And the reason we do that is to reduce the amount of latency time it takes to actually connect to a device. Now, in the process here of getting everything set up, once we download the programming to the device, like we talked about yesterday via USB or network, when we're ready to get RTI panels set up, you will need to go to your distributor and purchase that certificate, the certificate for the app. You can buy them directly from RTI if you want. So if you go to RTI panel or virtual panel, it'll come up and it'll tell you, here's what's available for you. Here's the training videos on it. Here's how to get it set up. And then if you're ready to purchase, RTI panel license can be found here. You click here, and you can buy them directly from us. Again, we prefer you to buy them from your distributor, but you can buy them from us. Once you buy them from us, though, you've bought them. That's all there is to it. If you buy them from your distributor, at least you're buying a certificate, and then if you made a mistake, you can go back to them and work it out with them. When you're ready to redeem your actual certificate for a license, you log into your dealer site, go to the apps, and then select Redeem License. And in this Redeem License, you're going to put in your license code and the MAC address of the processor. And the MAC address of the processor is vitally important. That's why we have you put it in twice, because the licenses are tied to the MAC address of the processor, not the individual device, which is very advantageous for you, because with people getting new phones every 6 months or a year, if they get a new phone, they're able to use that same license on their new phone or their new tablet year after year after year and not have to get a new license every single time. So once they submit that in, they will get an actual license file, and you'll want to save that license file into a file, maybe the client's file or something like that, and title it as such. Now, once you are ready to load that license into Integration Designer, you're going to go up to the File button, and you're going to select System Properties. And under the System Properties, we'll go to the RTI panel and Virtual Panel tab. And I'm going to load in the license right here by clicking Add, finding the license, and putting it in. So you can see now it says iPad, iPhone 5 user license. And there's the details, 5 connections, the MAC address of the processor, and the certificate. Press OK, and then we load this in. Once we load it in with just the license, we're good within the LAN. But if you want to use it remotely, you have to set up an external gateway through the main processor, and you get that through either a dynamic DNS or some sort of static IP. Set it up on the network with whatever the external IP or the host name is, and port route it to 4110. And you will do the same thing with the same information right here. Okay, we recommend 4110 as the port route. Take the same information from the network, put it in right here, and then load it into the system file. Once you've done that, then you can get your app set up. So first and foremost, you get the welcome screen, you hit the Get Started button, whether it's Android or iOS. You hit Get Started, it's going to automatically detect the processor of the network you're on. If you are remote, you can hit the plus button and enter in the information, the manually configured server information. Then you can select the correct processor. Once you select the correct processor, the files will be listed. The compatible files for that device will be listed. So if you have more than one iOS device, make sure to label them for what, or name them for what exactly they are, so you don't put the wrong file on the wrong device twice or something along those lines. And then the download the configuration will begin. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that you won't need to go through this there shouldn't be any reason for you to go through this process again, unless for some reason the processor gets power cycled and frees up the license. But anytime you do any changes to the programming for that RTI panel device and load it into the processor, the next time the app is launched, this will take place. So you don't have to go through and do that again and again and again. Again, you need one license per device. So if you have 2 phones and 1 tablet, you need 3 total licenses. If you think you're going to have 4 or maybe even 5 licenses, we do have a 5-pack available for you to purchase, and it's any iOS license for $500. It's a very good deal, and that's US-based pricing, of course. So 1 license per device. Once you go through the once you go through the setup on this, you're good to go. So really, what we as you're going through here and as you're setting everything up and it's all looking pretty well and good, it's coming along. You're liking what you see, all that kind of fun stuff. But then you're ready to bring it to the client, and they pull a fast one on you. They say, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you that DirecTV sent me a new setup box. How do I, just wanted to let you know." And you're groaning because now you've got to change all of these IR codes. You've got to make those changes. Well, the cool thing about Integration Designer is that we've got you covered on it. If you go up to the word Edit and select IR Code Search and Replace, what it will do is take that one device that you're on, like this T2X, turn it into almost like an Excel sheet so that you can swap these codes out quickly and easily. I can go to the IR tab, select the new remote that I want to use. In this case, maybe they sent them the HR24-500. I'm just grabbing one out of thin air here. I'm going to go to my port route, the DirecTV and the main processor, and then I'm going to search and replace all the codes. Boom. All of them except for those that have a different function description will change over. So in this case, I would need to find the cursor enter command and place that there, the actual dash and put it there, the info button with a lowercase I and put it there. We don't, again, make assumptions for anything, so if it doesn't come over, you may need to just drag and drop it over. The cool thing about this is that it is going to change all the codes for all the macros that have used this. So now The buttons themselves have been changed to that new code set. The macros have been changed on this device to that new code set. And you can even do this on a main processor. I can open up the main processor and go edit, code, search and replace all the codes. And if we finally talked them into getting a brand new TV and getting rid of this old one, or even this HR24500, I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, power on. Where's my power on command? Boom, 24500. And every macro that accesses this watch TV has now been affected. So the IR code search and replace is a huge time saver for you. All right. So really, when we're talking about RTI and programming all of these different devices and different options, they all kind of just blend into, or tie into each other. The process is going to be the same for what you want to do for these different types of things. It's dragging and dropping commands, right-clicking, creating macros, putting the different types of commands onto the different types of buttons and pages, and making sure that it's fluid for the client. So what I'd encourage you to do is, as you start to program with RTI, start off in segments. Don't do your entire home in one sitting. Do one room and make it simple. Just do the, you put the processor in, you put the remote in, and you assign the IR codes and see it happen. And then you create a macro on the processor and have that turn everything on and see that happen. And then it'll just kind of start to snowball. You'll get that effect. You'll get the understanding of it. And the process will just be even more and more. Now we have a lot more trainings that are available for you that cover automation events, the 5 different types of automation events that are available for you, how to add the additional expansion devices like the Z-Wave device. We get into doing even more extensive flag situations, like being able to have pop-up flags that occur when the volume levels are pressed. So you can have buttons that appear and disappear based on flags, and password protection using flags. And all of those are available to you on the dealer site underneath the pre-recorded training videos. So take advantage of those. In March, I believe we're going to have an advanced level training as well that'll get into much more of those things. But for now, I want to thank everybody for coming out here and enjoy creating the custom experience for your client each and every time. That's what RTI truly does, and gives you the opportunity to separate yourself from everybody else out there. Key takeaways for today: opportunity to program all those devices, IR code search and replace, two-way feedback, make sure to read the get info, and RTI panel apps. So with that, we'll go ahead and open up to questions for a few minutes here. And for those of you that don't have any more, again, keep in mind, this will be posted, a link for this will be posted on the training calendar, most likely by tomorrow. So thanks everybody for your attention and time. I know we're cutting short on time, but I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. Question that came up here, let's see. Can you assign a PIN password page to lock users out of accessing an in-walk in a commercial or corporate setting? Absolutely, and you could do that via flags if you wanted to. There might be even a driver for password protection of flags. You'd have to look into the third-party section, but you can use flags to do that. There is a training video that does get into that a little bit. So take a look at those and be able to work on that. And if you don't find anything, let me know. Will an online on-demand video of this be available? Yes, absolutely will. I think we just talked about that. So what sort of tech support do you have? Email, toll-free, calls, etc. You can always send support@rticorp.com an email. You can call us anytime you want. If you are out of the United States, you contact your distributor and they will provide the tech support for you and things of that nature, and get you set up. Can you pull in RTSP streams? I'd have to double check on that. I mean, we can do motion JPEG streams for sure, but RTSP, I'd have to double check on that for you. When will we get a certificate for this training? Probably by tomorrow or Monday. Had a challenge while uploading the license to an iPad until I used the encryption key. Why did that happen? Well, sometimes those encryption, until you use the encryption key. Well, the encryption key is just based around the You had to generate a new encryption key, is what I assume happened. They should automatically generate an encryption key for you, but sometimes those encryption keys don't get transferred correctly when the download of configuration happens. So or in the file. So generating a new one was probably you just need to generate a new one and send a new one. Sometimes it just gets lost in translation. I mean, it should never happen. I have very seldomly heard of that actually happening. Can you trigger a macro like a sleep timer with a kind of countdown so that a macro triggers 15 minutes after the button is pressed? Yes, absolutely. In fact, there is in the clock driver here a you may have already. Oh, this is an older one. There is actually a countdown available in the driver commands. So if I go to clock, you'll see that there's a countdown or control on reset, start the minute as, start the, directly 20-minute countdown timer 1, and then you can initiate it via a start. Let me see if I missed any questions at the top here. Can a macro be split, turn on TV via IR, the local, then, yep, I think we covered that one already for you, which is good. Any other questions out there today, folks? All right, well, if there are no other questions, thank you very much for your time. Have a great week, everybody.